Hello and welcome back to Lorcana Villain. My name is Baker, and today we're taking a look at the top 16 deck lists for a 10k event with 186 players. This was hosted by Charlie's Collectable show. We've covered these guys quite a lot in the past. They've always run very large Lorcana events that attract a wide player base of very talented players. And for set 5 meta, this is our largest pool of data so far. As I said, 186 players. We're about 3 weeks, between 2 and 3 weeks away from the next Disney Lorcana challenges in Birmingham and Las Vegas. So we're keen to look at all the data that we can. We do have a few extra breakdowns here. I've got a list here of all of the complete meta share, all of the ink combinations that were represented and by how many pilots. I don't know who originally put this together. I found it on Discord under a message saying found this on Reddit, so I don't know where it came from, but thank you to whoever put this together. And as you can see, Amber Steel, the most popular deck by quite a large margin. Ruby Sapphire following it with 37 players, and Ruby Amethyst 25 players. No huge surprises there for the top 3 decks in my opinion. Sapphire Steel with 12 pilots is pretty respectable. Emerald Steel sitting at 9, obviously a huge drop off since the Bucky days, but I still think it's a good deck. 9 Emerald Amethyst players, and then yeah, I'm surprised to not see a couple more Amber Emerald and Blurple decks, just because I feel like they were very hyped at the moment. But nonetheless, great to have this exact breakdown. And is this a big 3 meta? I still think the meta's super wide open and that you can win with lots of decks, but the Amber Steel, Ruby Sapphire, and Ruby Amethyst decks do seem to be the most popular so far. So is it going to be a big 3 meta? We shall see. A quick shout out to the channel sponsors, Cardmarket. If you're looking for Lorcana singles at competitive rates, then check out Cardmarket. But let's take a look at the top 16 deck lists. So in first place, we do have SteelSong piloted by Brennan Decandio. No stranger to Lorcana success, someone that we've had the pleasure to have on the channel before for an interview, and they've made top cut DLCs in the past. A lot of success at prior online events. And yeah, just a very renowned player and content creator. And yeah, showing that SteelSong can go all the way. There are 5 in the top 16 SteelSong decks, and then 4 Ruby Amethyst and 4 Ruby Sapphire. So you could make the argument that that's not the best transition for day 1 to day 2 for SteelSong, considering they had 47 pilots overall in the tournament, and Ruby Amethyst having nearly half of that. It's nearly double the amount of SteelSong decks compared to Ruby Amethyst, and only 1 more in the top cut. But that's not necessarily a poor transition for SteelSong. It could just be a very good transition for Ruby Amethyst. But nonetheless, this ink combination taking first place, and we consistently see that this is just so incredibly powerful, having access to a whole new world where we can play out as much of our hand as possible and just refresh, in combination with the singers that you get in Amber, such as Cinderella and Ariel, a lot of players utilizing Ursula, and obviously access to Rapunzel if you don't want to go down the route of a whole new world, and of course Cinderella being able to sing things like Strength and Let the Storm Rage On. It's just an incredibly powerful archetype, and with the addition of Pete from set 5, 3 cost inkable, 3 quest for 1, and on play, your opponent can't play actions until the start of your next turn. If you're able to just sing a whole new world, get a hand, play out a ton of characters, the likes of Piglet, who can quest for 3 if there's multiple characters on board, Mr. Smee already quests for 2. If you're able to just extend like this and then play Pete, that can be absolutely game winning. This version in particular also bringing back the Lantern from chapter 1, 2 cost uninkable item. You can exert to pay 1 less for the next card you play this turn, and this is just going to be able to, this is just going to enable us to extend all the more when we get that fresh hand. Whether it's 4, 5, 6, 7 ink that we've got to play with, this is going to allow us to play either more characters to the board or just a better quality of characters. Maybe you're lowering the cost of playing that shifting that Cinderella Stout-Hearted, and then you've still got enough ink to play a Piglet and a Prince Naveen or an Ariel, something like that. These Lantern tilts are going to add up over the course of the game, and of course they can enable just things like turn force shift into a Stout-Hearted Cinderella. Isn't always going to be preferable, to match up dependent, but sometimes that's going to be perfectly reasonable. Also, of course, enables a turn 3/4 drop. We've got Rapunzel, which is going to most of the time not going to be your preference, because you're not often going to be able to get much damage off, because your 1-drop can only ever be Robin Hood or Cinderella. So I don't think that's as relevant on curve. Later on in the game, it's fine. But Prince Naveen on 3 to immediately sing Along Came Zeus, Whole New World if you really need to, Strength or Storm Rage On, is not not bad by any means. But looking at the rest of the build, as I mentioned, we got 4 copies of Cinderella, Borum Sensation, and 3 copies of that Stout-Hearted Cinderella. Now, before I go on, I will make the point of saying I know Decandio, who is a content creator themselves, they've been uploading videos to their channel looking at different meta decks. And it was in the last 24 hours. I think it was like 17 hours from moment of recording, they uploaded another video looking at a few decks, and they do show a SteelSong deck, which does have some differences to this. Their other build, they were playing 3 copies of Daisy Duck, who is obviously absent here. Now, Daisy Duck, obviously a super strong card, and it's definitely SteelSong decks that have made the most of it, especially because you just, like, there's synergy with the whole new world. Like, even though you're making them draw, yeah, sure, sometimes you're going to make them draw into something that, again, assuming they hit a character on top of the deck, and it's like, if it's an action, then it just goes to the bottom, obviously, or just a non-character card. But yeah, sometimes you're going to give them a character that's really going to make a difference, and sometimes it's just going to be an uninkable, or fine, it's something else that they can use for ink. But if you're building to that whole new world, the fact that you're feeding them extra cards with Daisy isn't the worst, and obviously she's just so hard to answer early game. But Brennan cut all the daisies for this particular list. They've added the lanterns, they've cut a Piglet and a Mr. Smee, and they've added a 3-drop Ursula. And they've also added 1 more Cinderella Stout-Hearted. Now, I would recommend going to watch Decandio's video yourself. I will link it down below. Obviously, although they're not talking about this build, they're talking about a slightly different one. But I would recommend go watch their video. I think I certainly learned a lot from it, and I think they will do the best job of talking about their deck in more detail. But one point that they did make that I do want to echo is even when they're only on 2 copies of Cinderella Stout-Hearted, I think in a large event, if you want to win, if you want to make day 2, where day 2 a lot of the time is open deck lists, I would always want to be showing at least 1 copy of this Cinderella Stout-Hearted in the list, if nothing else, to make your opponent respect that a 1-drop Cinderella can represent a Stout-Hearted. I think if there are none in the list at all, then you just take one potential thing that they need to play around off the table. So that is something that he said that I'm glad to hear, because I've said that a lot in the past. I think you absolutely should be, like, at least threatening these options. The one that's the biggest surprise to me, but again, put my hands up fully to Brennan Decandio's knowledge here, is they're on 4 copies of the Prince Naveen, 4-cost uninkable, 3/3 quest for 2, sing a 6, and when you play him, you can play a song of 6 or less for free. Now, my issue with this was, like, I always said it should be like at least probably a 2 count, because maybe sometimes you don't get your shift line off. If they break that shift line, you just need to be able to sing this whole new world and refresh your hand. This is the way to do it. Also, just playing Zeus or Storm or Strength can often be super good. Like, if you're putting this down on 4, then Strength of Raging Fire could be representing 4 damage. Zeus is obviously 5, so that can be good in and of itself, and then you are still representing a Singer 6 on board for your next turn. I was getting hung up a little bit on the idea of, like, okay, if you play Naveen on curve and then you sing a whole new world specifically, then you're not doing anything else with your turn, unless of course you've got things on the board that can sing, like Ursa and Cinderella, then fair enough, or Ariel. My issue was that I just didn't like the idea of playing Naveen, singing a whole new world, not being able to do much else with your turn other than maybe sing a song, and then your opponent gets to start utilizing those 7 new cards first. But I think against some decks, they're not even going to be able to utilize as much of their hand as you are anyway. Like, if you're going to use those 7 cards better, then it doesn't really matter. But yeah, Decandio saying they absolutely would not play less than 4, which is super interesting, and took them all the way to first place in a very large event, so a huge congratulations to them. Looking at our other SteelSong decks going into top 16, we've got Gunner here. A lot of similarities, but they are playing the 4/4 Queen line, which was not in Decandio's list. I'm a big fan of the Queen just as an extra shift line, and I think the adaptation to strength that she can make can really help you just take out bigger bodies and locations, things like that. There can be downsides to shifting, though. Of course, you are essentially going -1 in card count. If you're immediately singing something like a whole new world, then that obviously doesn't really matter. But yeah, there are arguments against running too many shift lines. But I'm a fan of the Queen, and we see the 4/4 here. 2 copies of that Stout-Hearted Cinderella. The song lineup looks pretty standard, but we are seeing 2 copies of Grab Your Swords here. And we're also seeing 2 copies of Lawrence, who's just a great turn 3 beat stick. Can help you against Flins. And yeah, just 4/4 questing for 2 is a great stat line. Also on those 4 copies of Prince Naveen, which, there you go, that's data to listen to as far as I'm concerned. So congratulations to them. Next up in top 16, we've got Brian, who's the first SteelSong player to be utilising that Daisy Duck. So a very aggressive build here. We're seeing 2 copies of Ursula Vanessa, just 2 copies of that Prince Naveen. We're seeing 2 copies of the World's Greatest Criminal Mind, which obviously synergizes really nicely with our 4/4 Queen line, and there are already plenty of good targets for World's Greatest Criminal Mind. Just 1 copy of Cinderella Stout-Hearted. Hey, I think that's the bare minimum. Just be threatening it, especially in open deck lists. We're also seeing 1 copy of Aerial Sonic Warrior, which can be really good against steel decks with that big bulky 8 willpower. Against red, you normally ink it, but this can be a nice option. Just 1 copy of Grab Your Swords. The rest of the songs are looking pretty standard, so huge congratulations to them. Next up, we've got another Brian, also using those Daisy Ducks, and they're also using the 4 copies of Pete here. I'm actually surprised to not see Pete in more of these lists, to be honest. I think, again, I think he's just game winning. We're seeing 3 copies of that Cinderella Stout-Hearted. Standard songs, 2 Grab Your Swords. Yeah, looking real good. Congratulations to them. And our final SteelSong deck, we have James, also using those lanterns, 2 copies here, and we're seeing 2 copies of Be Our Guest to help us fish out specific songs. And of course, don't forget, like, Stout-Hearted singing sword ability. Whenever you play a song, you can challenge ready characters, so it's more cards that can get that online, and of course, just more targets for Ariel to hit. We're seeing that 4/4 Queen line here, 4 copies of Pete, 3 copies of Prince Naveen, and just 3 Rapunzel. I like those counts. Personally, I'd probably want the 4th Rapunzel over something like maybe one of the Be Our Guests, or maybe raising the lantern count, but nonetheless looks really good, did really well. Congratulations to them. Alright, going back to second place, we have the first of 4 Ruby Sapphire decks. So most builds of this I see these days tend to be the Ice Block plus 4/4 Sisu line, but we're not playing any of that at all. Instead are big bulky characters, along with obviously Tamatoa with that item synergy and working really well with the 2 Lucky Dime. We're running 3 copies of Scar, 7 cost uninkable, 6/5 quest for 2, Rush, and Daddy Isn't Here to Save You. During your turn, whenever this character banishes another character in a challenge, you may ready this character. He can't quest for the rest of the turn. So against certain board states, especially against like the Amber decks and the Emerald decks in particular that have like tend to run like flood with a lot of small bodies, you can just clear boards with this Scar, which is pretty cool. And of course, again, any deck where we're running Fishbone Quill, we're not as bothered about our uninkable count. We're also seeing 3 copies of the big bad Mufasa, Ruler of Pride Rock, 8 cost uninkable, 4/9 quest for 4. On play, exert all your ink, and then 2 of your ink is 2 cards from your inkwell are randomly added to your hand, and whenever this character quests, ready all cards in your inkwell. That second ability, I don't think is going to be something that you're going to consistently get off. Like, because if you've played Mufasa, even if you're only at 8 ink, okay, then you go down to 6 because you draw 2 of them, and then as you go into your next turn, you're probably inking to at least 7. So say you use that 7, you could play down the Lucky Dime, and then questing with Mufasa, re-readying all your ink allows you to immediately play that dime, and then maybe you can play down like a Grandma Tala and an item or something like that. So sometimes you will be able to utilize all of your ink a second time, but I just think the additional threat to be able to put down and say, answer this, or I'm going to have an insane turn by questing with this, plus I could develop Lucky Dime and exert that too, and just make big jumps. So along with Tamatoa, it's just a must-answer threat. Again, I'm not fully sold on Mufasa, but he is a very powerful card. He's cropping up enough that you should expect to see him in at least half of the blue decks that you're going up against, and put in a lot of work for Jose here, taking them all the way to second place. It's definitely something to take a look at. They're running 4 copies of that Vision of the Future, which I love to see. 2 cost inkable. Look at the top 5 cards of your deck. 1 into your hand, 1 into the bottom. Just find that key piece, that Lucky Dime when you need it, that removal when you need it, whether it's the B-Prep or the Maleficent or the Mufasa or Tamatoa to push for game. Fantastic card. We're also using 4 copies of that new Tipo as another way of ramping. No Mickeys, but we've got 3 copies of One Jump Ahead, which Tipo can sing, obviously. 4 Fishbone Quill is our other ramp, and then we're playing 3 copies of Chicha, 2 cost uninkable, 2/1 quest for 1, support, and 1 on the way. During your turn, when you put a card into your inkwell, if it's the second card you've put there this turn, you may draw a card. Now, doing this on curve can be risky. Against some decks, it's fine, but obviously against Steel, you've always got to be worried it's going to be immediately removed. Even against Ruby, like some of them are playing Teeth and Ambitions. So I don't think on curve you're always going to get this off. Sometimes you will, but I think just as something that you can do later on in the game when you're already at that sort of 4. If you've got the Quill developed, or something that can sing One Jump Ahead, then you do this alongside something else, like like Flavisham Cheater on a turn where, like, maybe you played the Fishbone on 3, and then on turn 4 you're at 6 ink, you play the Flavisham to banish the Portugal that you played on 1, and you put down the Cheater, and then obviously you ink with Fishbone, and you immediately draw a card, and then you're protecting Flavisham against something like maybe a Beaking Undisputed. So yeah, I think on curve Cheater isn't always safe, but I think she's viable a lot of the time later on in the game, just to basically get an immediate draw 1. And the support is not insignificant either. You get a couple of characters into range to take out Castle. Anything with 4 strength is now taking out Robin Hood or the Floodball Mother Gothel, so the support can come in handy as well. And then yeah, standard item package, 3 copies of that Vitalis Sphere. Some players playing the Ruby Chromicon, which is you just exert it and your character gains +1 strength, which can obviously fix maths in a lot of ways. Maui immediately one-shotting the castle, things like that. But I think this Vitalis Sphere is enough to be able to do that job, and it's just, again, it's a cheap item. So yeah, deck looking super good. Congratulations to Jose. Going into top 8, our next Ruby Sapphire, we have Jarrett, who lost in top 8 to the Ruby Sapphire player that we just looked at that came second. And to be honest, you can kind of see why. This variant, obviously very strong. This is that Ice Block version. Obviously, Ice Block and getting more characters into the range of things like Medusa. We're not playing any brawls here, but also helps with both of the Sisus. But the Mufasa's 4 strength, meaning that you need to have 2 Ice Blocks down to be able to deal with that. And the Scar having 6 is going to be very hard to get into the range for Sisu. So really, you're reliant on your Maleficents and your B-Preps, which we're only seeing 3 and 2 of here. So you can understand why that is. I'd love to have seen it. I'm gutted it wasn't streamed. I'd love to have watched this event. But yeah, you can see why this player may have had an issue dealing with the plethora of threats from the second place list. But nonetheless, this list looking real good. 4 copies of the Vision of the Future. We've got the 4 Tipo here and 4 copies of One Jump Ahead. 3 Kuzcos to be able to immediately answer locations and opposing dimes. Everything else looking pretty standard, but I do prefer this build. Like, this is the way I would go with Ruby Sapphire, although I would definitely play at least 3 Be Prepared. But other than that, this looks like pretty much what I would play. But yeah, I'd be interested to see what the results would be of these 2 builds against each other numerous times in a row. But nonetheless, congratulations to them. Next up in top 16, we've got Brandon, who is on the Ice Block variant. Only 2 copies of the Daring Visitor, I do think is low, especially since we're not playing the Emboldened Warrior either. Once again, only 2 copies of B-Prep, but we're maxed out on the Maleficent Monstrous Dragons. As well as 4 Visions, we've also got the 4 Develop Your Brain, so tons of search here to hopefully find the pieces that we need when we need them. No Kuzcos here, instead we're opting for 3 copies of Hideaway, which is the same effect but without the body. And I do think this can make some sense, especially in the mirror, because if they've got Tamatoa and Dime developed, you're not always going to have enough ink to play the Kuzco and the B-Prep or the Maleficent, whatever it is that you need. Sometimes you will. Obviously, these decks can ramp really high. But for that matchup in particular, I can imagine it's easier to be at a point where you can immediately go Hideaway plus B-Prep, something like that. So I can kind of see the argument, even though I think I would prefer the Kuzco. Brandon also utilising the 3 copies of the Cheater for some more card draw if they're able to ink multiple times. And we're seeing 4 copies of Donald Duck, who has the Mickey Mouse effect. Top card of the deck goes into your inkwell face down and exerted. And Brandon is playing the 4 copies of Brawl. Some players deciding that it's not needed with the normally 4 copies of the Daring Visitor plus Ice Block, but if you're wanting to only play 2 Daring Visitor, then Brawl makes sense. So yeah, looks super good. Congratulations to them. And our final Ruby Sapphire list comes to us from Joshua, also on the Ice Block variant with a 3/3 Sisu line. We're playing 4 Visions of the Future, 2 copies of Hideaway as opposed to the Kuzcos, 2 copies of Brawl in here, but we're also seeing 2 copies of Gaston Arrogant Hunter, who obviously can really help you with Daisy Ducks. But I think the most... Well, Daisy Ducks, yeah, because there were a lot of SteelSong in this meta share, but I think the other Ruby Sapphire decks could get super punished by Flynn Rider, and I imagine were at points during the tournament, but those 2 Gaston are certainly going to help you there. Once again, just the 2 B-Prep. I do think this is low, especially if we're going to start seeing more builds of Ruby Sapphire that are more akin to the second place list, which is just more of these bigger bodies that you can't always necessarily get into Sisu range consistently enough. But nonetheless, a great looking deck and a great result for Joshua, so congratulations to them. Alright, going back to top 4, we have the first of 4 Ruby Amethyst lists, and this one comes to us from Kendall Burdett. Again, a very well-known player in the community with a ton of success in their Lorcana career so far. And while I do consider myself a very experienced and fairly talented Ruby Amethyst player, I do take the knee to Kendall, who has proved themselves to be just a master of the deck overall. And this version looking really, really nice. Our 1-drops are the set 4 Chernobog's followers Magic, but the set 4 staple of 4 Chernobog's followers and 4 Magic Broom. It's a bit disputed between Ruby Amethyst players at the moment what the better 1-drops are. Some players utilizing 1/3s like Minis and Olafs, and even Rafikis. But these just provide a ton of consistency, and because we are playing, along with the 4 Queen's Castle, 2 copies of the library, I think this makes an awful lot of sense. You are just going to be drawing all of the cards, and you should be seeing things more often than not, the things that you're looking for when you need them. But yeah, super consistent. 4 copies of Flynn, so we have that very aggressive early line available to us. We've got 4 Snake, 4 Fox, 4 Goat, 4 Rabbit, 2 copies of that Merlin Crab, even without 1/3s. Crab is great. Like, again, you can boost this Magic Broom up to hit for 4, and the Chernobog's follows to hit for 5. Of course, they help out with Madam Mims. They're immediately taking out things like castles. Crab is just super good. 4 copies of the Emboldened Warrior, which is such a fantastic card, not only because it's providing a shift option for the 1 copy of the Empowered Sibling, which are going to help us with lower to the ground decks where more of their characters are going to fit into this 2 strength or less range, because obviously we have no way of manipulating strength. But again, any like Emerald decks and Amber decks, so many of their characters are already in this range, and even in the mirror, you're getting rid of Rabbits, Flynn's, most 1-drops, so she's super online. But of course, we've got the 4B prep when we need them. But yeah, Sisu works really well, obviously, on that curve after Flynn Rider. 4 copies of Maui, 3 Medusa, 4 Friends, 4 Brawl we're seeing in here. Again, I'm trying Ruby Amethyst without Brawl at the moment, but it is tried and tested, a great answer to certain things, and it's inkable when you don't need it. So yeah, looking like a really smooth, really consistent build of Ruby Amethyst. And again, I salute to Kendall, who is very much a master of the archetype, so congratulations to them. Next up in 4th place, we've got Zarek, who lost to Brennan Decandio in top 4, and you can kind of see why, because this deck looks super tidy, super consistent, but it is very much built to be taking on things like Ruby Sapphire, Sapphire Steel. Like any decks that are just putting down 1 character at a time, you are just hoping to always have the answer. We've got 3 Tremaine here and 3 copies of B-King Undisputed. But of course, SteelSong able to extend a lot more consistently, so they're not going to have been hitting their prime targets as often. But of course, we've got 3 Medusa here and 3 B prep. We are running a 4/4 Mini and Olaf line. Those 1/3s, of course, working really well with the 4 copies of Crab that we've got, and we stay out a range of things like Storm Rage on, but like anything to upset our 1-drops. Like, sometimes it's just a case of they got off 1 more quest than they ordinarily would have, but that can make all the difference. They are like the 1/3s. Standard bounce package here. We are seeing 4 copies of Elsa, the 5th Spirit. 5 cost Inkable, 2/5 quest for 1. Rush and Evasive, and when you play this character, exert chosen character. No brawls here, which again, I've cut myself, which has felt good. And in some ways, Elsa can like just be a better brawl for some characters. Like if on curve you developed Sisu on 3 or Fox on 3 and Goat or Merlin on 4, then on 5 when you play Elsa, you're hitting for at least 6 strength, so that's taking up things like Flavisham. A Diablo that's not at the Cove isn't gonna live this, but of course even if they are at the Cove, then you use your 3 and your 4 drop to take out the Cove, and then Elsa is taking it out. You can take out the Flynn Rider this way, so as much as I've not quite gotten Elsa so far in set 5 meta for Ruby Amethyst specifically, I'm coming a little bit more round to it, especially now that I have cut the brawls myself. I may end up adding the brawls again, but Elsa very much filling that role. But yeah, super smart looking list, and you got to imagine they've got such a good matchup into Ruby Sapphire and Sapphire Steel a lot of the time. But a great accomplishment, great list, congratulations to them. Oh yeah, I'm a fool of a took, obviously, last thing to mention. There are no locations here, no Queen's Castle, which is a statement. And I have seen some discourse about how locations just don't feel great at the moment, with so much Crab in format and so much Kuzco and a lot of Hideaway. They maybe just don't feel as safe as they once did. I am nowhere near ready to, while I can see the argument, I'm nowhere really near ready to cut the castles yet, because while I do see the point point. That there are situations where it is just instantly removed, and that feels bad. But I think Queen's Castle is a card that is so extremely good when it does stick, that it's absolutely worth it, whether it's just the clock that you put your opponent on or just the extra cards. So, yeah, I'm not ready to cut my castles yet, but I can see the argument. Next up in top 8, we've got Luca, another player that we've covered before. A very similar looking list, but they are on 1 copy of the Floodborn Sisu. They are playing the 4 Queen's Castle, 2 Tremaine, 2 Bee King, but everything else looking very similar. The 1-drops, the Elsas are here, no brawls, all max 4s of all our bounce stuff. So, yeah, looking super good. Congratulations to them. And our final Ruby Amethyst list in top 16, we've got Lucas with a little bit of spice. We've got the 4 Schoenberg's followers, and then 2 copies of Cogsworth to give a rush to one of our characters on play. We are playing those 2 Elsa the Fifth Spirit, but we're also playing 4 copies of Brawl, and 2 copies of Teeth and Ambitions. No 1/3s in here, no Kuzcos. Of course, just singing this with Madam Mim Snake can be fine, but you can play it later on in the game and put the damage on your Sisu or your Fifth Spirit Elsa or your Rabbit, so Teeth's still a good card. We are playing 3 copies of Maleficent, and this is a 62 card deck. And one of my favourite things about Maleficent is just like the consistency that she adds. So you could make an argument for like maybe just cutting a couple of these and just going to 60 cards. And either keep one of them as a Maleficent as a consistency card or just raise your count of something else. So yeah, personally I'm not a huge fan of Maleficent if it's over a 60 card deck, as much as I do like Maleficent in and of herself. But 3 copies here, we've got a 3/2 Sisu line. I think if you're running 2 of the Floodborn, I would always want 4 of a shift target. So that's super interesting. 2 Bee King Undisputed, no Tremaines, 4 Queen's Castle, 4 Bee Prep. Yeah, a few counts and choices here that certainly confuse me. But nonetheless, my top 16, it was a huge event, so congratulations to Lucas. Next up in top 8, we've got Corey with some EA tempo. Just win the game. Big fan of this deck. Our Amethyst package is as follows. We've got 4 Snake, 4 Fox, 3 Crab, 4 Goat, and 4 Rabbit. Our 1-drops are 4 copies of that Clarabelle, who on play, you can pay 2 ink to banish an item, and items are feeling really good at the moment. And of course, 3 copies of the Floodborn Clarabelle, who on the turn, when she's in play, at the end of your turn, draw to match your opponent's hand size. So along with our Amethyst package, that's another way that we can draw a lot of cards. Our other 1-drops being 2 copies of Rafiki for a bit of board control and 2 Cogsworth for that rush out of nowhere. Running 4 copies of the new Bonsai, who's a 2-cost uninkable 3/2 quest for 2. Great character, great stats, but just I absolutely would play him, but 4 is an awful lot, but it's a very strong card. We're running a 2/2 Mother Gothel line. I think these are super necessary because like we don't have a lot of instant answers to like big things like Tamatoa and Mufasa's, things like that. Of course, we do have Reckless open to us, which can sometimes help, although if they just exert where they just tilt the dime, then doesn't help us hugely. But I like Lyle Tiberius Rock being here, giving Reckless, but you sometimes just need an answer to certain things, and both Mother Gothels can be that. The Floodborn, making your opponent choose which characters they return to their hand, and of course the 2-drop, you can pay another 3 to choose. It's just a built-in Mother Knows Best. We've got 2 copies of You're Welcome as well, which can also do that, as well as get rid of locations and items, or even just bounce one of our own characters back to our deck for some extra draw. So we do have those options for big bodies. We've got 4 copies of the Ursa Deceiver to snipe those songs, and 2 copies of the Sea Witch Queen to stop our opponent exerting to sing songs, which in itself can be huge. And of course, when she quests, we can exert a chosen character in play. Running 2 copies of Cricky that provides Challenger 3 to all of our board on play, which can give us nice questing turns, and questing for 3, just another aggro character. 2 copies of Elsa to exert and have a bit more board control. 1 copy of Kick Cloud Kicker for another bit of board control for characters of 2 strength or less. 1 copy of the Library, 2 copies of Queen's Castle, and 1 copy of that Emerald Chromicon, who is popping up here and there, 3-cost uninkable during opponent's turns. Whenever one of your characters is banished, you may return chosen character to the player's hand. So this can be super annoying. Some decks aren't going to care that much, like even against Ruby Amethyst, like if they just make sure their only characters are goats and rabbits. I mean, it still helps because you're still upsetting tempo and they're not pushing as much. But they obviously, with goat, they're just gaining lore, and rabbit, they're drawing cards. But it can stop them extending with other things. And yeah, there's going to be plenty of situations where this one-off is going to be super annoying for the opponent. So yeah, all these cards look good. For me, it's a few too many two ofs. I'd like to see some more fours in here. Like, I do absolutely, I have no issue with 2s and 3 ofs of certain cards, like, depending on how often you want to see them in a game. But yeah, I think this just looks a little bit too inconsistent to me. But nonetheless, Corey was able to pilot it all the way to top 8 in a huge tournament. So clearly a very talented player, knew the list well, so congratulations to them. Also in top 8, we have one Sapphire Steel deck piloted by Jonathan Lamb. No copies of Tamatoa is the first big question mark in front of my face. We are playing those 2 Lucky Diamond. Of course, they can just work along with the 1 copy of Ariel that we're running, Treasure Collector, who quests for 5 if you've got more items than your opponent. And of course, we've got plenty of other characters that have 2 lore. Smee, Beast, Kuzco, Kronk, Tinkerbell. I don't know. I think I'd still want Tamatoa in here. I just think it's so good. So I am surprised to not see it. The rest of the item package looking pretty standard. 4 Whole New World, 3 Grab Swords, 2 Let It Go to remove it opposing Tamatoas, Stout-Hearted, just big bodies, 2 copies of Fire the Cannons to interrupt shift lines, and then yeah, 4 Tink. We've got 1 copy of Kronk, 6 cost Inkable, 4/5 quest for 2, resist 1, and during your turn, whenever this character banishes another character in a challenge, you can deal 2 damage to chosen character. So it's the same as the Puny Pirate ability from Tinkerbell, or the Simba Fighting Prince has a similar ability. Nice stat line on Kronk. 4 is out of Medusa, and resist 1 means he's not falling to Zeus. 1 cheaper than Simba, obviously, so that I think I prefer Simba, but this being a 6 drop, like, obviously is important. 1 Kuzco to get rid of locations and items, 2 copies of Chen Pao to be a big old bodyguard, 3 Beast for additional draw if we don't want to play a Whole New World, and then a lot of the standard suspects, the Cogsworth, the Flavishams. We've got 2 copies of Pete there to again provide a situation where if they can't answer your board, then you might just win. 2 copies of Belle, who's filling that role of Tamatoa to be another aggressive quest star. I still just really like Tamatoa. But then 4 Mickey, 4 Smee, 2 Argus to help against opposing Flynns and into Daisies and help with locations, and 4 copies of Captain Hook to also help with those early characters like Daisy Duck. So yeah, deck looks really good. I am surprised to not see the Tamatoa, but everything else looking super good, so congratulations to Jonathan. And our final deck list to look at for today's video from Charlie's Collectable Show is Eric in top 16 with some Amethyst Steel, another super low to the ground deck. We've got 4 Hook, 4 Cogsworth, and 2 Chernobog's Followers. Standard bounce package of 4 Snake, 4 Fox, 3 Crab, 4 Goat, 4 Rabbit. We're running 2 copies of Maleficent for that extra consistency. Mr. Smee, obviously great stats, and because we're running Captain Hook, greater odds that he won't even take damage. 4 copies of that Elsa, who, as we mentioned earlier, can kind of fill that role of a Brawl in some situations. 4 Tink to be our main mid-game presence, and then 2 Strength, 4 Zeus, 4 Friends, 3 Castle. I love this list. I think this is super good. I just want to see the Jafar. I want the 6 cost uninkable Jafar. By the way, I think my camera's been lagging a bit through this video, which I apologise for. But nonetheless, this list looks super good. We've seen that this deck can do really well at big events just by being really consistent, and, like, again, it's a very aggro deck. So yeah, huge congratulations to Eric. And that's it for the top 16 deck list for Charlie's Collectable Show. It's been a long old video, and again, I think my camera's been lagging, which I'm super sorry for. So we won't go on much longer. But yeah, there's been quite a few events now for set 5 to draw data from. And again, we're drawing closer and closer to Birmingham and Las Vegas DLCs. A little closer to the time, I have planned to look through all the deck lists that we've covered so far this set and see if we can get some specific stats for the most popular decks and the most popular versions of decks, things like that. And I'm planning another group podcast with some esteemed players to talk about the meta and predictions for the Disney Lorcana challenges. But what are your thoughts about the deck list that we've covered today? I'll hear all about it down below. But that's it from me for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you're brand new to the channel, please subscribe for all things Lorcana. Hit that like button to show your support, and we'll see you soon.